All right. Hey Megan, thank you so much for helping me on this project. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're presenting on the 10 questions to ensure equity in school discipline for the Texas Association of Black School Educators coming up soon. And I know you well, obviously, know your school well, and I thought it'd be fun to just to hear your experience using the 10 questions. As part of your team's equity practices. Would you mind just introducing yourself and saying your school and maybe something you love about it?
Yeah, my name is Megan Chavez. I'm the principal at Grivois-Shah Elementary in Tucson, Arizona. We are a large elementary school, about 550 students who are brilliant and doing amazing things. And I really appreciate you having me here, Tim, because this is the work that we're doing right now. The training that we engaged in with you has really pushed our thinking, and we're not quite there yet, but we definitely know that some changes need to happen in the expectations that we have and the way that we support our kids.
Well, Charlotte, Tony, and I, we really enjoyed getting to know you and your team, and it's been fun to connect with you since that training too. So, well, let's dive in. So the questions are, I got them up on my screen right here. I'm gonna just share them so we can see it. And share. And oh, where'd you go? There you go. Okay, so let's start with the expectation. It's question number one. What is the expectation that's on your mind right now?
So the expectation is respect. And then more specifically, the way that we have defined respect in the past is that we have a quiet body and voice. And so I think that that is where our team has thought about, we're not really fully through it, but we've thought about the voice and the body being quiet, and how does that look for everyone?
Okay. So thinking back to when that expectation was set and defined that way, and I think it's like in the classroom, right? Or in the classroom, we're respectful by having a quiet voice and body.
It's in a lot of areas, actually. So
Oh,
it's the classroom, assemblies, hallway, even in the, well, no, yeah, in the bathroom it is. It's also quiet voice and body. So it's really throughout the school other than the playground.
okay. So why is this the expectation? Thinking back to when it was set, why was that expectation framed that way?
Um, I think that in the different areas, it maybe has a little bit of a different connotation, but I think for the overall was it kind of exactly what's stated in front of us is the safety, order, and learning. I think in the hallways, it's a safety thing is what we were thinking at the time. Like we can't have people pushing, things of that nature. In the classroom, I feel like it's order based, if I'm being very honest. And I think that even though we'll probably say it's so that everyone can learn, it really is more order based than it is about the learning. I think that that's where it comes from.
And we'll explore that just in a little bit too with question 4. And so the idea then with question 2 is that why there's some safety with keeping our bodies quiet in hallways and common areas, things like that, but just the order of the classroom at first. Who decided that this expectation was necessary?
Initially, it was campus leadership, our PBIS team, our leadership team, and then it was brought to the district, I'm sorry, to the rest of the team. To be honest with you, I think that respect started before I even got here. So I think that that was one that has been around for quite some time. So I can't really speak to how it initially came, but we kept it on as one of the expectations when we went through the process several years ago.
Okay, so when it was there was a process of sort of refreshing some of those PBIS expectations, and respect stayed. It had been there and it stayed, and then it was framed as quiet voices and bodies. Okay, who were parents involved in that process?
Well, I don't even think so. I think that it was really the team did it, and then perhaps it was shared at site council. It's been a while. Like we've had this for a long time, and we really haven't revised things in a while.
Yeah.
The other thing right, and I think the other thing that happens is when we see other schools talk about their expectations, though there's certain ones that you sort of see all the time, and respect tends to be in there. And I think that in some ways that helped to validate us doing it, and perhaps has never pushed us to think about wanting to change it.
So families weren't part of the process necessarily, which, to be honest, is probably 99% of how most schools go about this, and at least has been in my experience. And were students involved in the process of setting the expectation?
No.
Okay, and that's part of it too. That question through who decided it was, and especially as we think about equity, kind of who wasn't there is a part of that question too. Okay, thank you, and I appreciate your vulnerability with that. That just knowing that a lot of times those expectations are just kind of received. We just receive them, and they just kind of work. So we don't have a lot of reason to examine them. And then when we go through a process like this, there might be some thoughts or some feelings that come up about it, and that takes us to question 4. We're respectful by having a quiet voice and quiet body. What do you believe about this expectation?
So when I really thought and really gotten deep into why this one popped into my head when asked to examine one expectation a couple months ago in that training with you guys, there are parts of me that say, yeah, when we're going out to a fire drill, I can't have you running around to try to find your best friend and hold your best friend's hand, or, goofing off. In a real emergency, I would need to know that kids can walk out without anyone getting hurt, trampled, things like that. So on the surface, I feel like I sit in this place where I'm comfortable with it. And then when I really dig deep into a quiet voice and a quiet body, when I'm learning, I want to do the learning. I want to do the work. I might want to touch something. I might want to move around. I actually, since we've been sitting more through this pandemic, I've stopped using my chair, and I either stand up at my desk or I have a yoga ball that I sit on. And so I wiggle, while I'm working, and it's okay for me to wiggle while I'm working because I'm still getting my work done. So when I think about things like that, and really we've seen it even more through the pandemic because we've watched children be in different settings, in maybe a more organic setting for them. Children today, I read in a classroom and a child was sitting on the floor. She was fully engaged, 5 years old, asking me questions about the book that I read, but she wasn't in a chair. And the whole time I was reading, she was doing this, and that was okay. And so those are the types of things that I think are making us pause and think about, does quiet body equal learning? And I think it actually doesn't. I think that it probably inhibits learning in a lot of ways because kids can't do the work. They're not able to do that when we're constantly saying your voice needs to be quiet and your body. The quiet voice piece really is what hit me, because if I am shutting your voice down and telling you to be quiet, and it's written on the wall, and those are things that we post around the school, I'm telling you to not be who you are. And that's really what gave us some uncomfortable feelings that we felt like we needed to explore a bit more. I know the intention was you can't scream out, those types of things. But if you're really, really excited about learning that you're doing, and you are like, oh my gosh, I did this, and your voice gets a little loud, I don't know that I want to turn that off. I don't want to tell you that learning isn't fun. And so that's where we're at.
And I appreciate it, just as always, just your vulnerability in those reflections. It's especially when you were part of making that expectation the first time, and the intention behind it was to support learning, to be vulnerable and realize that there's some implications that maybe weren't expected as part of that. That's beautiful and necessary. Well, thank you. So let's move on to question 5. You've examined what you believe. Question 5 is, whose values are reflected and reinforced by this expectation? Excuse me while I'm
No, you're fine. I just want to start, I love the teachers. I love my teachers, and you know some of them, and they are good teachers. They've done this work for a long time. We have a lot of new teachers that are doing amazing things. But I think that a lot of these expectations that maybe we need to dig into a little bit more are definitely reinforced by teachers. It is helpful for them if children are maybe in a quieter state so that they can give information. But I think that it shifts the focus to a teacher-centered classroom and not a student-centered classroom if we're thinking about our feelings more so than the kids' feelings. And so I'll be very vulnerable and say I know that this work is going to be very hard to engage with the teachers because they checked off on all of this and were very happy that we were expecting children to be quote unquote calmer, quiet, and a little bit more orderly. And I think that it's this idea that we've held in the past of what school and learning looks like. We've done a lot of great work in our profession and very science-based work, thinking about how the brain works and the connections that need to be made and the relationship that has to happen for learning to happen. That can't happen in isolation. It can't happen with you sitting at a desk by yourself, being quiet all the time. So I believe that on the one hand, we know this and we understand it. We talk a lot about it. We read articles, engage in PD about it. But really deep down, I don't know that the teachers are ready to do this. And so
this cat,
their
not helping
their
me.
desires are reinforcing maybe this expectation that children are going to be quiet learners all the time. The other thing is I think that families kind of expect to send their children and want them to be their best and, be quiet and do the learning. I've had families, which is odd, we see our children at home playing and being loud, but sometimes when they come to school, you see a little look on parents' face when children are in the garden and they're gardening and talking and playing with worms and giggling about the worms. And it's like, are they learning? Because they're not sitting in front of a piece of paper. And so we haven't done this work with our families yet. And I think that, and also it's going to be an area that's going to be challenged, I believe.
So I think that's really interesting. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to ask directly, like how does the race and ethnicity of Grivois staff right now compare to the race and ethnicity of the students that you serve?
We predominantly serve Hispanic students. But I think that we're actually pretty well represented with our staff, with our teaching staff. I'm really proud to say, and I think that it's been this way for quite some time, we have not a lot, but we have more male teachers than I normally see on an elementary school campus. So I feel like children are getting a diverse group of educators that are here. We have a smaller population of African-American students, but we do have a young African-American teacher who has just brought such light and joy to the campus, and again, added another male to our teaching staff. So we've got a male teacher in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, exceptional education teachers, and we are pretty diverse racially at school. So I think that is helpful. What I don't think that we do to match our community is the socioeconomic differences. We're in a high poverty area. And so just being Hispanic doesn't make you connect necessarily to the children we're serving. The other thing that we serve is a lot of children who have experienced pretty significant trauma. And that is a big disparity that we have. And so when we thought about these expectations, that has come up a lot because our children who have experienced trauma, we really have to help reshape parts of their brain and make connections that have been rewired or are not there. And when we do things that we think are the best, we can unintentionally be harming the children and their ability to form relationships and then get to that higher executive function. So, on the surface level, we've got a lot of Hispanic teachers here. We have men, we have women, we have diversity in many ways, but I don't think that we always have the diversity of the experiences that our children have had. And it's hard for us to see that through our lens. So then we say things like, they should be doing this, or they should be blah, 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 when we're not recognizing that their brain is not wired in that way right now. And we've got to work towards that, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. So kind of going into whose values are reflected and reinforced. I mean, the values that are reflected and reinforced are really the teacher's values, like the teacher's values, whoever happens to be in charge of that space, that space at the time. Where do you think those values, those values come from? I mean, it sounded like they seem to be kind of middle class values as you were talking about it.
I don't know why, because I'm not old enough to remember this, but I feel like we get stuck in that idea of like the 1950s, like, you know, we're all going to come to school and girls are going to have a little dress on and we sit in these rows and everyone's quiet. And it's kind of cliche to say it. That seems to be, when we look at the old days, that seems to be something that we picture all the time, and then put that next to what's happening in classrooms. It really hasn't changed in a lot of ways. It's odd that in, 2020, 2021, I'm having conversations about children being able to collaborate and work together. So I think that a lot of it comes from the way that we were taught. And we know that. I mean, we know that if you're not really engaging in some serious professional development and reflection, you're oftentimes going to teach the way you were taught, because your brain made those really strong connections when you were at that age. So I think that a lot of these expectations just come from this idea that things need to be orderly, that children need to respect their elders. Those are things that I hear on campus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. That's really, and it's just neat to think about, just that, like, whose values are reflected and reinforced, and where did we even get them in the first place? It's we often just receive them. We receive them. It seems, and we know that to be true in teaching too. Well, let's flip that question a bit. And respectful when you have a quiet voice and a quiet body, whose values are erased by this expectation?
I think the biggest group that I see just being completely erased is students that have experienced trauma. And or children that are struggling with some sort of mental health issue. ADHD comes to mind, things of that nature. And it's not as overt in some of those cases. You just might need to fidget a little bit. But if that's your coping mechanism, and that's a way that we've taught you, if you need to get up and wander around, go ahead and do that. And then on the flip side, we say you're not being respectful because you're out of your seat, your body's not quiet. So those are the kiddos that I think of right away. And then when I dig deeper into who those kiddos are, oftentimes those are our children that have experienced trauma, that are living in poverty. And those oftentimes are our Hispanic students and our Black children. So we then get in this pitfall of the children that we are trying to serve. We're also harming them because we're not honoring some of the experiences that they've had. And, I would say that the majority of our children are living in some sort of toxic stress. We know that when they come back from the pandemic, it's going to be even worse. Our area got hit really hard by the recession, and here we are again. I've talked to probably every single day, we hear from someone that either lost their job or had a family member die. So although this is such a hard time and we're asking so much of our teachers, our PBIS team decided that this was exactly the right moment to think about our expectations, because we're going to be coming back from an even tougher situation. And we cannot expect children who have sat literally in their homes, on their beds, on the floor, outside, learning for the last year, to then flip right back into school, sit in their seat, never move, and not talk. We're hearing loud noises in the background. We're hearing multiple voices in a house, and the child's still participating. So that helps us to know they can do it. It doesn't have to be silent for learning to happen. So I think that, we've done a disservice, but we're at least willing to accept that maybe we need to change some things. But I think it's across the board. I don't believe that our data suggests that one particular group is being affected more than others, other than children that are, working through their trauma and or have a mental health condition. Those are the two that I think are sticking out in my mind.
Actually, in your numbers too, your numbers would seem to bear that out. Just the data that you actually have it's not even a hunch. It seems to be that case. So thank you for that. So the values erased by this expectation are students who just maybe the shortest possible way of summarizing it is students for whom being quiet and still is not their default way of being. And there's lots of reasons why that might be. And you're seeing that a lot of our Black and brown students are often in that group of students who are having trouble meeting that expectation. Well, I guess, well, we did that. Who would have difficulty meeting this expectation? As we answered that question too. So the question 8 is really interesting. I love question 8 because I think it's a really important. Well, yeah, I'll let you talk to me what you think about it, but I like question 8. What would happen if this expectation didn't exist? If all of a sudden it just got erased from the matrix and we didn't worry about it?
So Tim, say that again, because I think you froze. Well, either you froze or I froze. So say it
Oh,
again.
okay. I'll say it one more time. So question 8 is, I think, a really interesting one and part of this list. What would happen if this expectation did not exist? We're respectful by having quiet voices and bodies. All of a sudden, it just wasn't a thing that showed up on any document you had.
I think one of two things would happen. I think one, kids would behave in a way that supports their learning. They would talk about things when they need to talk about it. They might get up and walk and, ask a friend for help. They might not use their chairs and stand and wiggle a little bit as they're engaging in group work. So I think on the one hand, learning would happen probably just exactly as it should. On the other hand, I think that some of our children who have not yet learned what it means to support another learner might struggle with hurting somebody with their body and not being aware of their space. They might hurt people with, either the level of voice, the maybe the words that are being said, things like that. And I know this expectation doesn't quite get to the type of words that we use, but I think sometimes there's maybe some feelings behind words that, either voice level, tone, aggression, and, intention behind the words that might end up being hurtful to another learner. So when we thought about this, I think we actually almost thought about, like, what if it didn't exist first, and then thought intentionally about how we would build it. And so I think we worked backwards when we first thought about this a couple months ago.
It's really interesting because this question is I like them all, but this one, at least one in my work with teams and working through them, the question 8 has been either one that teams choose to start with for some reason, or just when we get to it, really seems to set the stage for the last 2, which guide us to kind of the, well, so what? We've explored kind of why it happened, whose voices were there when we decided it, whose voices ought to be included. We've kind of gone through the whole process now. And now I'm really curious to see where you and your team are at with these next 2. So what would have happened if it didn't exist? Well, we'd probably have to do, what I'm hearing you say is that you'd have to do some work with some students who would need to learn to use voices and bodies in ways that support the community's learning somehow. It sounds like that could be accomplished without that expectation, or perhaps a revision of it. And then another thing that might happen is we might do a lot more exciting projects, or we might have a lot more conversations, or we might have, some more flexibility of movement, and students might learn to advocate and speak up for themselves when they didn't understand. And those all sound kind of nice. And just imagine
Right.
how I'm just imagining like the paperwork you wouldn't have to do with like so many fewer referrals.
Yes.
And I don't.
Yeah. I think one of the things that one of us froze.
Yeah, I hear you, and
Oh,
it looks, yeah,
there we go.
yeah.
We both froze. So I think one of the things that we thought of, we have a dual language strand. So kindergarten through 5th grade, we've got children who are learning Spanish, and it's very heavy in Spanish and then moves towards a 50-50 model of English and Spanish instruction. We also serve a high population of English learners. So we are really talking a lot about discourse and voice and making sure that children are talking, both just to speak, but also speaking about the content. And so as I'm going through this with you and I'm thinking about, those kids pop into my head of how do we encourage them to use their voice? And so if we intentionally said to children, when you use your voice, you're helping yourself learn and others learn, I think that sets the stage for children to be encouraged and excited about talking and learning and sharing their perspective, which is what we need. That's going to make us stronger, both as individuals and our community.
Mhm.
The other thing that I think
Can I
about
stop you for
is
just a
like,
second? Is it all right if I just, I guess I want
yeah,
to go back to it because it connects with whose values are reflected, or excuse me, whose values are erased. And in one sense, it's not even only about just values in terms of what our moral compass. It's also just in terms of educational excellence. It is not even good
right,
pedagogy to have this expectation for our emerging bilingual students, and certainly for our two-way, well, whether they're in the English, however our emerging
right,
bilingual students, and
right.
whatever the dominant language is not even good practice for this to be, for the expectation to be thought of the way that it has been, perhaps.
Right. And I think that, the other thing is, we say this all the time, everyone on campus is a language learner. Everyone is. We are all learning a language and sharpening our skills, no matter what we're learning. And especially, obviously our children that are in the two-way dual language program, our children that are learning English for the first time, but also our children that have experienced trauma. Again, we know what
Mhm.
happens to the brain. We know that children are coming to school with fewer words spoken in the home, with fewer books read to them. And so you don't learn any language without practicing it, and you have to hear others use it. So when we start to say no one can talk, we need to sit quiet and only hear one voice, which oftentimes, as we talked about, is going to be definitely a culture that, cultural experiences that maybe you have not shared, and also an ethnic background that maybe you don't share. We're reducing the number of perspectives that a child is exposed to. So from the one perspective, that's what we thought about with voice. The other thing that we thought about with quiet body and quiet voice is that idea of walking down the hallway, in a single file line. That doesn't happen. So if we go to the zoo or we go to the mall, people aren't walking in a line. I walk shoulder to shoulder with my husband or my son or, my friends. So teaching children to just be aware of your body and recognize silly things like don't stand right in front of a door. When the door swings open, you might get hit with it. So
Mhm.
that's a way that you need to be aware of your body. You can walk down the hallway and do it safely where other people can also walk down the hallway and no one gets hit by doors and no one's shoving people out of the way. We can just walk and make sure everyone gets to where they need to go so that the learning can happen. And so I think that when we roll this out, we don't have the language for it yet. This is helping me though. When we get to the point of really rolling this out to everyone, the idea is going to be our voice and our body support learning for everyone. Instead of they're quiet, they are supportive of everyone. So if you're hauling it as fast as you can down the hallway and, throwing things as you're doing that, likely you're not going to be supporting the learning of someone else. But that does not equal you must be in a row looking like you're in a prison, because that is something that we need to erase from this community. Too many of our children are going, to juvenile hall or to prison way too early. And that's not an expectation that I want to have for my children.
Mhm. So you're thinking, and it's amazing because I'm just watching these questions work and to prompt the kind of thinking that your team, that you're leading with your team right now. And it's that, the question 9 and 10 are sort of they're not sort of, they're a pair. And question 9 is, how can the expectation of being respectful by having a quiet voice and body be revised to accommodate all cultures or sets of values? Or maybe, no, we can't do it. We can't do it. It needs to be removed because it causes cultural and racial erasure and provides a real threat to student safety or learning, or provides no benefit really. So we have an expectation, spending lots of energy enforcing it, and it doesn't even matter, perhaps. Where are you? Are you more kind of question 9 to revise? It sounds like you are more thinking, instead of quiet voice and quiet body, use a body and voice that support learning. Seems like more of a revision than a just chuck it out.
So I'm at the revision state, but I don't know where everyone else is yet.
Oh,
And I think that I need to really get there with everyone else for us to decide. I feel strongly that we need to revise it, but I have to be really careful with the intention, because I don't want this to be a revision that gets used in the old way. So if we have a voice and a body that allows everyone to learn, does that get interpreted by an adult on campus as everyone learns when it's quiet?
mm,
So what I'm trying to figure out is, do we remove it Or do we write it in such a way that is explicit so that everyone can understand that what we want is every voice to be heard? What we want is for movement to happen in a way that supports learning. We're bringing in, we have a partnership with the University of Arizona to bring in some music classes. We have a program that's starting called Upbeat, that's really based in rhythm and movement. And we want that to be carried in the curriculum. My curriculum service provider and I did a pretty extensive training in the neurosequential model of education. And one of the tenets is rhythm.
Yep.
We have to be rhythmic because that supports brain. That's just the way that we learn. I don't know how to get the phrasing so that that value and that intention is held. If I can't do that, and I don't believe that our team can really make sure that everyone on campus understands that, then I almost feel like we might need to think about number 10 and remove it and find other ways that we have expectations for children. So I don't know, we're not there yet. I hope that we can revise it in such a way that we help all adults to understand. We want children to talk, we want them to move. And I think it's going to be some reflection on how we learn. Nobody likes to go sit in PD for an hour and a half and not move. So if I can get the teachers to admit that sometimes I bore them by making them sit for an hour, then we can all start to believe that this is the way learning happens, not only for children, but for adults.
Yeah. Megan, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for just your willingness just to engage this process out loud and to share your thinking out loud. I think it's going to be really helpful for other school leaders to just to see that same level of transparency too. What do you see as being the power of these particular 10 questions? Like, why didn't you just think about this before?
I'm not smart enough to think about it by myself.
I know you well. It's definitely not a lack of intellect. Yet there does seem to be something about just the process.
It's all there. It's comprehensive and it's all there. And I think the other thing is that it pushes us because it's uncomfortable to say the thing that I've done for 18 years as an educator might have harmed somebody. That's hard to say. Yeah. And we're getting there as a profession, as a nation, we're getting there. And some of the really tough conversations are starting to be had. And it's long overdue. But it is hard to tap deep into what you have known. And they are values that you've held, whether you know it or not. That implicit bias is there, whether you want to accept it or not. And so what this does is in a kind and gentle way, say, let's think about the whole thing. And it's not, let's think about parts of it. Let's go through the whole thing and make sure that you've really thought about the people that you probably have not thought about in the past. And when we were talking about this, we've only done it twice where we've had little conversations in our PBIS meetings, but one of the things that I tried to link it to is when we're planning a lesson and we really think about that end in mind, one of the things that we also think about are possible misconceptions. What might a child not understand so that we can weave things in to support them, so that we can make time to go over some vocabulary or things like that. This essentially does that for us when we're thinking about, our core values, like who are we and what do we want to be? Because the misconceptions are sometimes the most powerful thing that you can address as an educator. And that is the thing that we almost always leave out. So then kids just keep being confused and then we wonder why it didn't work. I feel like that's what we've done in the way that we used to think about our expectations. And now, like, let's get it all out now, talk about it now. And it's concise. I mean, I've probably taken longer than we would normally need to because I talk more, but this really helps to go through it. I mean, think about, I don't know, it's been like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. It's not a long time for us to talk about this. And once you do it once, you realize quite a bit of our expectations probably need to change. And so I found it really, really helpful. I'm glad that you brought this to us, a couple months ago, and it's going to help walk us through this journey that we need to go on.
And of course, I have to just give a shout out to Dr. Charlotte Horton-Williams and Dr. Tony Harrison-Kelly too, for just developing the questions. Really, as soon as I saw them, it just was really clear how leaders like you and others around our country can really use them to support these conversations about equity. All right, so one final super tough question, and actually just a request, if I may. I'm thinking about that question 3: who decided the expectation was necessary? And a thing that came up was just that students and families were not part of that. What's your hunch about what would happen if you had the same conversation at site council or parent teacher or organization night or the unofficial meetings you might have with families?
A hunch that I have, and so when you answer this question and you and the amazing people that you're working with can figure this out, then you give me a call and tell me. But a hunch that I have is that our families will continue to just say, I defer to you, you guys are the experts. And so the thing that I'm trying to figure out is,
why do you think that's happened?
I think that a lot of them look at us as the experts because we work at a school, and some of them didn't have a good school experience. And so it's like, I don't really want to go back to this place where I was punished and sent to the principal's office. I've literally had adults say, I don't really want to go into your office. I didn't like going into the principal's office. And I try really hard. I mean, my office is a mess right now, but I try to make it a warm and inviting place. Lots of things for kids to do in here. I try to connect with my kids and have them come in. But to have an adult say, I don't want to go into your office when we're talking about their child, that is deep roots of, I was not valued, I was not loved, I was not cared for. And so sometimes I feel like they just look at us as the experts and, do your thing, and whatever you do, we're going to support you. And sometimes I think I don't know how to change it because I didn't have a good experience. So one of the things that I want to do is, how do I really bring this to my community in a meaningful way where they will dig in and really call us out on our BS? Like, tell us, no, what you're asking a child to do is not helpful because my family does this, or we are loud, we have big parties and everyone's talking and it's joyful and we are having fun. That can also happen at school. It doesn't need to be children in a row, quiet bodies. But I don't know that I don't know that they're ready to do that yet. Yeah. So that's the thing that I want to try to figure out, is how to get all the voices. I know not everyone, but a large majority of the voices, and not just the 1 or 2 that come to PTA and the 1 or 2 that are on site council. So tell me how to fix that and I'll be good.
Actually, there's going to be some resources for that too, for some other schools that have started down that journey. And I'll tell you what, though, it's hard, but I know if there's anybody who can start down that road, it's definitely you and the team over at Grijalva, for sure. Megan, thank you so much. I really appreciate just your willingness to share the process that you and your team are going through right now with this, and sounds like it's already going to lead to just a healthier, happier place for every single student, no exceptions.
I think that we're going to get there. This conversation helped me to know what I need to do next with my team. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.